So I want you to think about the last time you were truly betrayed.
Oh, wow. Starting heavy.
Yeah, right out of the gate. But I mean it. Not just, annoyed or slightly inconvenienced by someone in traffic, but deeply unfairly wronged by someone you actually trusted.
Right.
If you are really honest with yourself, what was the very first physical sensation in your body? I mean, for most of us, it's probably this sudden tightening in your chest.
Oh, absolutely. The adrenaline spike.
Exactly, a rush of blood to your head and just this overwhelming visceral demand to balance the scales. You want them to hurt exactly the way you are hurting.
It's an instant reflex.
It really is.
Yeah.
Well, welcome to Reformed Thinking. Today we are taking a deep dive into our source material to explore, honestly, one of the most difficult, counterintuitive, and frankly offensive commands in all of Scripture.
Offensive to our flesh, for sure.
Oh, 100%. We are unpacking Romans 12.1, which says, "Vengeance is mine, I will repay," says the Lord.
Such a massive verse.
It is. And the mission for this deep dive is really to figure out how relinquishing this deep-seated human desire for personal revenge, how it isn't just about being a nice person.
Right, it's way bigger than that.
Yeah, it's about how a radical trust in God's sovereign justice completely transforms how you handle injury, injustice, and enemies in a fallen world.
Which we desperately need.
We do. And just to be crystal clear right out of the gate, the sources we are looking at today, they approach this from a very robust sovereign grace perspective.
Yeah.
We aren't looking for, cheap therapeutic advice here. We're dealing with earth-shattering theological truth about God's total sovereignty over providence and justice.
That is exactly the right framing. Because, if we try to tackle Romans 12.1 as merely a behavioral modification technique,
Like a self-help thing.
right, like 10 steps to a less angry you,
Yeah.
we are going to fail completely. The raw reality of the human condition, which our sources highlight so brilliantly, is that our innate depravity immediately clamors for a weapon when we are slandered or harmed.
A weapon, yeah.
The human heart, left to its own devices, is basically a factory of retribution. We don't just want justice in some abstract sense.
No, we want to hold the gavel.
Exactly. We want to be the ones administering it directly and personally.
Right, and what is so deceptive about this instinct is how we dress it up. The sources point out that revenge, well, it rarely calls itself revenge.
No, it never does.
It wears highly respectable clothing. We say things like, I just need to teach them a lesson, or I'm just establishing boundaries.
Or I'm holding them accountable.
Yes. Or, my personal favorite, I'm standing up for myself. It's a matter of moral strength. But the theological reality being presented in our sources is that this impulse isn't moral strength at all. It is actually an act of high treason against the divine court.
High treason is the perfect term for it.
Right.
When you are offended and you seek to exact personal revenge, you are essentially marching into the courtroom of the cosmos,
Wow.
shoving the judge off his bench, and seizing retributive sovereignty for yourself.
That is a terrifying thought.
It is. You are making a profound theological declaration, whether you realize it or not. You are declaring that God's timing is too slow, or, that his justice is somehow deficient,
Right.
and therefore you, with your limited perspective, must take matters into your own hands to ensure the universe operates correctly.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that is a massive paradigm shift.
Yeah.
It is like a civilian jumping behind the wheel of a police car.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
You might genuinely want justice. You might have even witnessed a real crime, but you have absolutely no jurisdiction to turn on those sirens and start running people off the road.
Not at all.
Your pain, no matter how legitimate it is, doesn't make you omniscient. It doesn't give you a badge.
Right.
When we try to execute vengeance, we are basically stealing God's cruiser and causing absolute chaos in the streets of Providence.
Right.
And we do it simply because we don't know how to drive the vehicle of divine justice.
That is a brilliant analogy.
Mm-hmm.
You lack the jurisdiction, and honestly, just as importantly, you lack the pure, unadulterated goodness required to wield that kind of power without corrupting it.
Because we're tainted?
Exactly. Only an omniscient, perfectly holy God can execute justice without it being tainted by selfish malice. And to really grasp why the Apostle Paul had to make this command so absolute.
But why there are no loopholes?
Right, why there are absolutely no loopholes in never avenge yourselves, we really have to understand the pressure cooker of the world he was writing to.
Historical context.
Yes, because this wasn't written in a vacuum. It was written to a very specific group of people in a highly volatile, dangerous time.
Let's dive into that historical context because, I mean, it changes everything. We're talking about the mid to late 50s AD, right?
Correct.
And Paul is writing to these small house churches in Rome, which is the absolute epicenter of imperial totalitarian power. What was life actually like for the people receiving this letter?
Well, it was incredibly fragile. First, you have the overarching Greco-Roman honor culture.
Mm.
In this society, honor was the currency of life. If someone insulted you, struck you, or injured your social standing, and you just let it pass without retaliation,
Yeah, you were seen as weak.
you weren't viewed as taking the moral high ground, you were viewed with utter contempt. Letting an injury go was seen as shameful, pathetic weakness. You were socially dead if you didn't strike back.
So retaliation wasn't just a temptation, it was practically a civic duty.
It was expected of a respectable citizen. And then you have to add the political layer on top of that.
Okay.
Just a few years prior, in AD 49, the Emperor Claudius had expelled all the Jews from Rome.
Right, the Edict of Claudius.
Exactly. And this was due to conflicts in the Jewish community, likely over the message of Christ. So by the time Paul writes Romans, Claudius has died, the edict has lapsed, and the Jewish Christians are finally returning.
But things have changed.
Drastically. They are returning to house churches that have become entirely Gentile majority in their absence.
Oh, wow. So there's internal tension.
Massive internal ethnic tension. And then externally, this unified but very fragile group of Christians is living as a marginalized, vulnerable minority under a pagan state that could crush them at any moment.
All right, let me push back on this on behalf of the listener, because if you put yourself in their sandals for a minute, this just seems crazy.
It really does.
I mean, imagine you are in that Roman house church. You have absolutely no political power. You have zero legal representation in the Roman courts.
None.
Your neighbors are mocking your faith, maybe stealing your property or harassing your family. If you don't strike back, doesn't turning the other cheek just look like pathetic cowardice? Doesn't it just invite more abuse from a society that only respects dominance?
What's fascinating here is that Paul is totally upending their definition of strength.
How so?
To the Roman eye, yes, it looked like cowardice. But Paul was showing them that refusing to retaliate was actually the ultimate form of moral courage.
Because it went against everything in their culture.
Exactly. Look at the alternatives they had. They could have adopted the revolutionary, violent, insurgent tactics of the Jewish zealots.
Right, the ones who believed in bringing about God's kingdom by slitting Roman throats in the dark.
Exactly. Or they could have adopted the retaliatory, honor-based ethics of Rome itself. Just play the Roman game.
But Paul says no to both.
He forbids both. He is telling them that refusing to seek personal vengeance is a countercultural witness. It is a massive neon sign to the pagan world that these Christians trust a higher throne than Caesar's.
They are essentially saying, we don't need to play your game of blood and honor because our God is already keeping the books.
Precisely. It was a profound statement of faith in God's providence. But, you're right to point out how impossible this feels.
It feels superhuman.
It is. A marginalized, oppressed people cannot muster the strength to love their enemies purely by gritting their teeth and relying on willpower.
Because human willpower snaps under that kind of pressure.
It snaps entirely. The answer to how they could actually do this, how they could live this out, lies in the very literary structure of Paul's letter to the Romans.
Right, because you can't just parachute into chapter 12.
No, you really can't.
The sources are incredibly clear on this. You cannot understand Romans 12 without deeply grasping Romans chapters 1 through 11.
They are the foundation.
There is this massive theological pivot that happens right at Romans 12.1.
Yes, the grand transition. Romans 12.1 begins, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God.
That word therefore is doing a lot of heavy lifting.
It is carrying the weight of the universe, what comes before it. In the first 3 chapters, Paul meticulously builds the case for total human depravity and universal guilt.
Jew, Gentile, everyone.
Everyone is under the wrath of God. There is none righteous, no, not one. Then he unveils the magnificent truth of justification by faith alone, solidified.
The core of the gospel.
Exactly. We are declared righteous before the bench of God's justice, not by our own works, but entirely by trusting in the finished work of Christ. The first 11 chapters are a masterclass in sovereign grace.
So to use an analogy, it's like chapters 1 through 11 are the massive sovereign grace engine of a vehicle.
I like that.
And chapter 12 is the car actually moving down the road. You can't expect the car of enemy love to move an inch if it isn't connected to the engine of God's mercy.
It just won't run.
Right. If you try to do the ethics of chapter 12 without the theology of chapters 1 through 11, you just end up with exhausted, resentful moralism.
That's the perfect way to look at it. The obedience commanded in chapter 12 is the fruit of sovereign grace, not a ladder you climb to earn it.
Wow. Yeah.
When you understand your own total depravity, when you realize what it took to save you, the sheer magnitude of the mercy you've been shown, it completely shatters your pride.
And this directly applies to you, the listener, when you are dealing with your own grievances.
Absolutely.
When someone wrongs you, the natural instinct is to elevate yourself above them.
To look down on them.
Exactly. To look down on them as this irredeemable monster while viewing yourself as the completely innocent victim. But Romans 1 through 11 destroys that illusion.
It levels the playing field.
It does. You cannot approach an enemy with pharisaical innocence. The text forces you to remember that you are a forgiven sinner dealing with another sinner. The ground is perfectly level at the foot of the cross.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it explains why self-righteous vengeance is so fundamentally incompatible with Reformed theology.
Right, because of what we believe about salvation.
Exactly. If you truly believe you are an enemy of God, spiritually dead, and saved only by his unmerited sovereign grace, how can you possibly turn around and demand the immediate, merciless destruction of someone who sins against you?
It's the parable of the unmerciful servant brought to life.
It really is. You've been forgiven an infinite debt, and you are choking someone over a few dollars.
So with that massive theological engine running, let's look under the hood at the actual mechanics of Romans 12.12.
Okay, let's do it.
Let's look at the specific Greek exegesis our sources provided, because it really unlocks what Paul is commanding us to do, and just as importantly, what he is commanding us not to do.
Well, let's start with the prohibition. The Greek phrase is miohus ektikantos.
Which translates to?
In English, it's never avenge yourselves.
Right.
The sources really emphasize the reflexive nature of this Greek phrasing. Paul is essentially saying, do not take the law into your own private hands.
It's a full stop.
It is an absolute prohibition against vigilante justice in your personal relationships. But notice how he softens the blow of this incredibly hard command.
Because it is hard to hear.
Extremely hard. But he addresses them right before it as agapetoi, beloved.
I love that detail from the sources. It's bursting with pastoral warmth.
He really is.
He knows he's asking them to do something excruciatingly painful, to let a real painful wrong go unpunished by their own hands. But by calling them beloved, he isn't shaming their pain.
No, not at all.
He is reminding them of their secure identity in God's love. When you know you are infinitely loved and vindicated by the creator of the universe, it removes that desperate, clawing need to defend your own earthly ego.
Exactly. Your honor is secured in Christ, so you don't need to fight for it in the Roman Forum or for us in a modern-day boardroom or on social media.
Right.
And then Paul gives the positive command to follow up the prohibition. He says, "Alla dotapon tawargo," but give place to wrath.
Give place to wrath.
Yes, this is the command to literally step aside, to vacate the judicial bench and leave a wide open space for God to act.
Wait, let me stop you there, because this phrase, give place to wrath, it can be wildly misinterpreted.
Oh, very easily.
I mean, that almost sounds like we're just supposed to aggressively suppress our anger, bite our tongues, while secretly hoping God absolutely smites the person who hurt us.
Like a weaponized patient.
Exactly. Like, I can't punch you, but I'm going to step back and eagerly watch God drop an anvil on your head.
Is this just a form of malicious passivity? That is a brilliant question, and it's a danger we all fall into. We think we're obeying the text when we are actually just harboring bitterness. But the Greek clarifies this beautifully.
How so?
We have to understand the difference between human anger and God's anger. The common Greek word for human rage is thumos. Right, that refers to a boiling pot. It's erratic, petulant, out-of-control anger. It's the temper tantrum.
The explosive stuff.
Exactly. But Paul doesn't say give place to thumos. He says give place to God's orge.
Orge. Okay, what's the difference?
Orge is a very different concept. It means a settled, cold, holy, calculated, and perfectly righteous opposition to evil.
So yielding to God's wrath doesn't mean secretly rooting for their destruction out of petty spite.
No.
It means confessing that the evil done to you actually is real. You don't have to pretend it didn't hurt.
Right. It's not denial.
You don't have to call evil good.
Right.
But you take that very real offense and you place it in the only hands pure enough to judge it properly.
Yes. You are surrendering it to the perfect justice of God. You are saying, Lord, this was wicked. It hurt me deeply, but I am too sinful, too biased, and frankly, too finite to handle the retribution. I leave it entirely to your holy orge.
That is so freeing.
It is.
Yeah.
And Paul didn't just invent this concept out of thin air to pacify the Romans. He pulls this directly from the very bedrock of the Old Testament.
Right. The text explicitly says, "For it is written," which is Paul's way of dropping an anchor into the deep theology of the Hebrew Scriptures.
Yeah.
He quotes Deuteronomy 32.35. Let's look at that Old Testament anchor,
This is from the Song of Moses.
which was given right before they entered the Promised Land, right?
Exactly. Given to the Israelites right before they cross over. In this song, Yahweh is asserting his absolute sovereign right to judge his enemies. The exact phrasing, "To me belongs a vengeance I will repay," is a divine guarantee.
A divine guarantee.
It is God explicitly claiming a monopoly on retributive justice.
And this is the ultimate comfort for you, the listener, when your sense of justice is just screaming for resolution.
Yes, it is.
Wow. Because the text doesn't say let it go, because it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things.
Right. It doesn't minimize the pain.
It doesn't say time heals all wounds, just move on. It says let it go because God's memory is perfect, and he will exact precise, flawless justice.
Which raises an incredibly important question, though. How exactly does God repay?
Right.
If we trust that God will perfectly balance the scales, what does that actually look like in reality? For the Christian, the answer to this question leads us directly to the cross of Jesus Christ and to the final judgment.
The Christological fulfillment.
This is the Christological fulfillment of Romans 12.19.
Let's go deep into this, because this is really the beating heart of the theology in our sources. Jesus is the ultimate example of Romans 12.19.
He lived it perfectly.
First, Peter tells us that when he was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but continued entrusting himself to him who judges justly.
But, and this is crucial, the sources are adamant that Jesus is more than just a moral example for us to copy.
He is the substitute, and he is the coming judge.
And this requires us to confront a reality that, honestly, much of modern theology tries to sweep under the rug.
Oh, they avoid it entirely.
Modern culture often paints God as this indulgent cosmic grandfather who just waves away our wrongdoings with a wink and a smile, like, oh, boys will be boys.
Right, a very therapeutic view of God.
But the sources insist on strict penal substitution. God never ignores sin. His holiness demands that every single sin ever committed must be punished. Every lie, every betrayal, every act of violence will receive exact, proportionate, divine vengeance. God's justice is an immovable object.
It is absolute, and here's where it gets really interesting and incredibly profound for how we view the people who hurt us.
Okay.
Because God demands absolute payment for sin, there are only two places that vengeance can ultimately fall.
Only two.
It is either paid for by the unrepentant sinner in the eternal conscious flames of hell, or that exact punishment was completely agonizingly absorbed by Jesus Christ on the cross on behalf of the elect.
Think about the staggering implications of that. It changes everything.
Right. If someone wrongs you and that person is a fellow believer, if they are elect, God's vengeance for the exact wrong they committed against you was already poured out on Christ at Golgotha.
Yes.
The infinite wrath of God came down on the Son for that specific sin. God will not and cannot exact double payment.
He's just.
He won't punish Christ and then let you punish your brother too.
That is a profound realization.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, if the person who wronged you is not a believer and they never repent, they face the terrifying eschatological judgment of Christ the King at the end of the age.
They will face the wrath of the Lamb.
Exactly. In either scenario, whether it's the cross or hell, the scales of justice are balanced perfectly by God himself.
Which means your personal vengeance is completely redundant.
Total unnecessary.
It really is. If you try to take revenge on a fellow Christian, you are basically saying the cross wasn't enough.
Wow.
If you try to take revenge on an unbeliever, you are saying hell isn't enough. In both cases, you are mocking the justice of God.
That is the theological mechanism behind why we must let go. It's not just about inner peace. It's about honoring the atonement and God's judgment.
Right.
But we have to be incredibly careful here because we've arrived at a very dangerous intersection.
Yes, we have.
Someone might hear, never avenge yourselves and leave it to God's wrath and conclude that Christianity requires absolute pacifism. Or worse, that it demands victims of abuse remain silent and allow abusers to run rampant.
Yes, we need to be crystal clear here, especially for anyone listening who has dealt with abuse, criminality, or any kind of systemic danger.
It is vital we clarify this.
Do not avenge yourself does not mean do not call the police. It does not mean hide evidence or don't testify in court or stay in a physically dangerous situation. Those are catastrophic misreadings of the text.
Absolutely catastrophic, and they ignore the very next chapter of Paul's letter.
Right, the chapter breaks weren't there originally.
Exactly. Remember, there were no chapter breaks in the original letter to Rome. Right after telling them not to avenge themselves, Paul moves directly into Romans 13.1 through 4.
Which is all about the government.
Yes. It outlines the vital distinction between private vigilante retaliation, which is strictly forbidden, and lawful public justice, which is ordained by God.
Explain how that works. How does God use the civil magistrate to execute justice in the here and now?
God delegates a limited, punitive authority to the civil magistrate. So, the government, the police, the courts.
Okay.
Romans 13 says the magistrate is God's servant for your good, and that he does not bear the sword in vain. The magistrate is essentially the avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer in the civil sphere.
So God actually provides an earthly mechanism for justice precisely so we don't have to carry the burden of vigilantism.
Exactly. Seeking a lawful remedy through the civil courts, calling law enforcement, or in the context of the church, pursuing church discipline. These are entirely legitimate biblical actions.
So it's not a sin to seek justice.
Not at all. The crucial difference is the condition of your heart. You can utilize lawful justice to establish boundaries, protect the innocent, and restrain evil in society, and you can do all of that with a heart that utterly refuses personal hatred.
So it's the difference between testifying in court to ensure a criminal can't hurt anyone else versus, I don't know, waiting for them in the parking lot with a baseball bat.
That is the exact difference.
One is trusting God's ordained institution of justice. The other is worshiping at the altar of personal revenge. You can seek protection and legal justice without letting the poison of vindictiveness rot your soul.
That distinction is vital. God hates abuse and injustice, and he has provided lawful avenues to combat them. Romans 12 is targeting the private malice of the heart.
The desire to see someone suffer simply because they made you suffer.
Right. It's about that internal bitterness.
So if we know what not to do, right, no vigilante justice, and we know how to properly use lawful civil justice, how are we supposed to actively interact with our enemies in our day-to-day lives?
That's where it gets really challenging.
It is. Let's bring this profound theology into the 21st century, because our modern society is practically built on the opposite of Romans 12.
Oh, the sources make very explicit contrast here. If you look at modern culture, it is absolutely obsessed with grievances.
Completely obsessed.
We have created entire societal frameworks based on victimhood and collective resentment. We see this in various modern ideologies. The sources specifically mention frameworks like secular social justice and critical race theory that build their platforms on historical revenge or balancing societal scales through retributive cancellation.
And we're not taking political sides here, but just reporting what the sources observe about these cultural frameworks. They operate on collective grievance.
Exactly. And social media is the ultimate manifestation of this.
It really is a retaliation machine.
Think about how incredibly easy it is to use a keyboard to avenge our theological, political, or personal egos.
Oh, it happens every day. Someone posts a critique of you or subtweets your beliefs, and the immediate instinct is to fire back with a quote retweet that absolutely obliterates them.
Right. You want to humble them in front of an audience.
You want to score points for your tribe.
And we justify it by saying we're, contending for the truth.
Defending the faith.
But so often, it's just pure thymos.
Yeah.
Erratic, prideful anger. The biblical framework utterly rejects this grievance culture.
Yeah.
It tells us that our primary identity is not found in being a victim,
Right.
nor is it found in being a conquering victor in the culture wars. It is found in being agapetoi, beloved by God.
And because we are beloved, Paul pushes us past mere passivity. He doesn't just say, don't retaliate.
No, he goes further.
Look at verses 20 and 21. He says, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. We are called to active, gospel-centered mercy.
This is where the rubber meets the road. I mean, it's one thing to silently fume and not seek revenge.
Which is hard enough.
It is, but it is an entirely different level of sovereign grace to see your opponent suffering and actively move to alleviate their pain.
I really want to put that directly to you, the listener.
It's a tough mirror to look into.
It is. When your critic, your opponent, or the person who betrayed you suffers a sudden crisis, maybe they lose their job or maybe they have a scary health issue, what is your first internal reaction?
Be honest with yourself.
Do you secretly rejoice? Do you think, karma, God is finally getting them back? Or do you offer concrete help? Do you pray for their actual well-being?
It's so countercultural.
Taking revenge, whether in action or just nursing resentment in your heart, is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. But feeding your enemy, offering them a drink, is pouring water on the fire of enmity.
It disrupts the cycle of retaliation. It's the very grace that God showed us when we were his enemies. We were starving and rebelling, and he provided the bread of life.
So let's quickly recap this incredible journey through the text. We started with the harsh reality of our fallen instinct for revenge and how it usurps God's authority.
Right, the high treason.
Then we looked at the immense pressure on the Roman honor culture and how Paul used the massive sovereign grace engine of Romans 1 through 11 to empower the radical obedience of chapter 12.
The theology drives the ethics.
Exactly. We parsed the Greek to see that we must yield to God's holy orge rather than our erratic thumos. We anchored this in the Old Testament guarantee of perfect justice, fulfilled either at the cross of Christ or the final judgment.
Which perfectly balances the scales.
We drew the crucial line between forbidden private vengeance and the proper biblical use of civil authority. And finally, we saw the radical call to active enemy love, overcoming evil with good.
It really is a theology that completely deconstructs human pride and forces us to rest entirely on the sovereignty of God.
It truly does. And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. The sources assure us that God's justice is perfect, but they also note his timing is his own.
Which is often the hardest part.
It is. We so often chafe at the delay. We want justice right this second. But consider this. What if the delay in God's justice, the very thing that frustrates you right now, isn't a sign of his absence, but a strategic window of sovereign grace?
Wow.
What if God is keeping the door of repentance open for your enemy for the exact same reason he kept it open for you when you were his enemy? Let that shape how you pray for those who hurt you. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the source material. We'll catch you next time on Informed Thinking.